Hi, I'm Laura.
And I'm Joe.
And this is CrimeDivers.
Hello everybody, welcome to today's episode.
Hello everyone, welcome back.
Thanks for joining us once again, and today we have a lot of sword.
Yes, you do
So
have a lot of sword.
Where in the world are we?
We are in Australia.
Australia.
I was like, where are we? We're in Australia.
I was going to say, since when does Australia start with an M?
Well, it's because I was going to say Melbourne, and then I thought, no, I actually need to say Australia. But we are in Melbourne,
okay.
But in Australia.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am sure, I'm sure.
And what's your episode called?
It's called Mr. Cruel.
Oh. Well, this sounds like it's going to be about a horrible person then.
Yes, and I'm going to put a wee trigger warning in at the start here. For once, I actually remembered it is about child murder and rape.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, just to let you know.
Okay, so if anybody doesn't want to listen to that, then totally understand. See you next time.
Exactly. But for anybody that would like to hear the case, shall we dive in?
We'll dive in.
Okay, so on the 13th of April, 1991, in Templestowe, which is it's a suburb in Melbourne, a family's life was about to change forever. A man wearing a balaclava, that's the one, balaclava, broke into their home at about 8:40 in the evening, and he was armed with a knife. And in the house was 13-year-old Carmen Chan and her two younger sisters who were aged 9 and 7. Carmen was babysitting while her parents were working at their family restaurant, and sadly Carmen was abducted at knife point.
Oh wow.
So
how old was she, 13?
Yeah, she was 13. So her two younger sisters, they weren't harmed in any way. It was just Carmen.
That's weird, they just taken one.
Yeah, no, I obviously don't know why, but she was the one that was sadly taken. So the police arrived at the crime scene, and the police had also made the assumption that the man had been watching the house for some time before his attack, so he knew that the girls were on their own.
Yeah.
He knew that their parents weren't at home, and I suppose if their parents, they ran a Chinese restaurant, so obviously they were out probably quite most nights, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who was responsible clearly, they thought, knew that. So that night, what happened was the three girls were watching the TV. When the man entered the house, the two younger sisters were able to tell police what actually happened. They said that the man was wearing a balaclava and had a knife. They said that he confronted them in the hallway. He grabbed them and dragged them into one of the bedrooms. He then told the two younger girls to go and stand in the cupboard. He secured the cupboard door, and once they were in there, he secured the door once they'd got into the wardrobe. Mm-hmm. And then he just left with Carmen. So told them to go and stand in the wardrobe, locked them in there, and took Carmen and away he went. Right. The family, they were of course completely distraught, but at this point no one could give them any answers of obviously what had happened. I actually did, I'll probably tell you that a wee bit well, but this was a documentary that I watched, and it was so heartbreaking watching, they did a wee press conference and stuff, and the mum, honestly, totally.
I know, it's so hard when you see the press conferences.
I know, it was horrible. So of course a massive police manhunt got underway, and the police, they began door knocking, but they had very few leads at this point. All they had to go on was
Laura can't read her right.
Oh, sorry. So I was like, what did I mean there when I said that? So I could read it, I just didn't understand why I had said it, but now I totally get it. So yeah, the only lead that they had on was a blunt spray painted message which was left behind by the abductor. The family had a Toyota car, and that had been spray painted with messages saying "payback, more to come," and some reference to Asian drug money.
Oh.
So I actually saw the car as well, so it's just like this white.
So this is like a revenge thing.
Well, that's what the police are thinking at this point, because there's obviously all these messages that they're thinking, oh right, okay. So as I mentioned before, the Chans, they ran a Chinese restaurant, and they also had a takeaway as well, and the police wondered if maybe there was a motive to do with the businesses. But Mr. Chan said that he couldn't think of any reason why they would be targeted at all. And, Mr. Chan himself, he wasn't known to the police. He was a very well-respected man in the community. So he had no idea why they would have sort of revenge against him or anything like that. So, as I mentioned before as well, Mr. and Mrs. Chan, they did a press conference to appeal for information. This was 3 days after the abduction. that did this press conference, and as I said to you, it was totally heartbreaking to watch. Mrs. Chan, she was actually holding Carmen's favourite dress as she begged, and I mean like begged for her to come home.
Oh.
She said all the family loved and missed her. She said, you know, this was her favourite dress and you have to come home and wear it. And she then just really broke down and just said, you know, please don't spoil my family, because she was obviously, you know, appealing to whoever had abducted her, like, please don't spoil my family, you know, please bring her home.
That's so awful.
You know, that she's obviously loved and everything. And I was totally heartbreaking. I had a little tear in my eye as I was watching it, because you could just see the pain and hear the pain. It was horrible. So the police were obviously hoping that the abductor was watching the press conference, and you know, that maybe he had a small amount of human decency and that he would release her. But
probably not.
No. So I thought, obviously during the documentary, there was like, I don't know if it's like sort of news reports and stuff, that there'd been like a few mums that had been interviewed as well, you know, about what happened, and they all said like similar things about not letting their kids out of their sight, you know, not letting them go to babysitters. One mum said that her little boy couldn't sleep because he was so worried that someone was going to come and take him away, and he was only 5.
God.
And he was just like, you know, he just couldn't sleep at night because he was so petrified, because obviously the news had filtered through this community, you know, like wildfire, so everybody knew what had happened.
It's terrifying.
And obviously, you know, mums were just terrified of leaving their kids alone, because...
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, if you don't know what the motive was, like, if you think... I mean, you don't know why they've done it, so they could be coming for anybody.
Well, exactly, that's
it. Could be boy, girl, you know, it doesn't matter. It could be any age. Like, you just don't know.
I know, and that you know, that'd be quite scary. I mean, having a young child myself, I would be absolutely petrified.
You wouldn't let it out your sight.
Oh, definitely not. Absolutely not. So, you know, parents and children, like I said, they became very fearful, and police, you know, they could do little to make them feel at ease while this person was still out there. You know, because they had no answers at this point, so they couldn't do anything about it. So a harrowing, you know, truth was about to be revealed, that this had actually happened before. Other young girls had been preyed upon, and the police believed that the person who had taken Carmen was also the person responsible for taking other young girls, including there was 2 girls one called Sharon Wells and one called Nikki Linus. So the abductor, his name is now banded out there as Mr. Cruel. That's where the title from there. They were starting to call him Mr. Cruel. But apparently, from what I remember seeing, I think they called him Mr. Cool at first, because...
Mr. Cool?
Yeah, just because once we find out later on, like, the person, well, that they think is responsible is, like, quite calm, cool, you know, obviously not fazed by any of this.
Right.
So that's why I think they initially called him Mr. Cool, but then it got changed to Mr. Cruel.
Well, that sounds more appropriate.
Yeah. So he, at this point, was now the most wanted man in Australia. And evidence has been found that Mr. Crow was actually connected to up to 12 assaults.
Oh, wow.
So I have got some examples. So I've got 3 examples. So on the 22nd of August in 1987, in Lower Plenty, a man wearing a balaclava broke into a family home at 4 a.m. armed with a knife and a gun. He tied the hands and feet of both parents and locked them in a wardrobe. He tied the son to a bed, and then he raped the 11-year-old daughter, and he cut the phone lines as well. But the identity of that person has never been revealed, so I don't know who that was.
But they think it's connected.
But they think it's connected to him, yeah. So that's that first example. So the second example was on the 27th of December 1988. Sharon Wills, one of the girls that I mentioned, it was a man who broke into her family home via the back door at about 5:20 a.m. armed with a handgun and wearing a balaclava. He bound and gagged the parents and demanded money, and he grabbed their 10-year-old daughter, put tape over her eyes and gagged her mouth, and abducted her. But she was released 18 hours later on the grounds of Bayswater High School. So she was found.
So did she give details?
Yeah, I think she did to what she could, but clearly they didn't find the person responsible at that point.
I take it you kept the balaclava on the whole time.
Yeah, so she couldn't identify his face, yeah. So the third example I've got is on the 3rd of July in 1990 in Canterbury, Nicola Linus, who I told you about. The man broke into the family home there at about 11:30 at night, and he was armed with a knife and a gun and wearing a balaclava. And he tied and gagged a 13-year-old girl, placed tape over her eyes. He disabled the phones and searched for money. And he then abducted her, drove her to another house and molested her for 50 hours before releasing her at a power substation in the suburb of Kew. So, again, she was released. So, the police came up with the opinion that first and foremost, Mr. Krul was a burglar. That's what they think he was.
Right.
But he had become opportunistic, and, you know, he basically thought, oh, well, why not? I might as well take this a bit further, basically. Yeah. And he basically think that he planned his operations carefully. You know, he selected his houses with families, you know, that didn't have, like, dogs or anything like that. So, like I said to you, that's when they thought that in Carmen's case, that he'd obviously been looking at the house before he'd actually done it. So he clearly scouted the houses that he was going to target, especially if he was burgling as well. You know, he'd obviously go to a house that didn't have any dogs or anything, so that, you know...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it would take a very stupid person to not scout out the house, because... Who does that if you break into the house not knowing what's on the other side of that door or window, however you get in, like that's, I mean, it could be anything. It could be some big butch guy with a gun in his hand. There could be a big dog jumping at you and biting you. You just don't know. So I think it would be very... Obviously, I'm not a criminal, but
I think you would do your research, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would do your research. If you were going to break into somebody's house, then you'd be very stupid not to scout it out.
Yeah, exactly. Especially
and get to know people's movements and...
Yeah, especially if it wasn't like a heat in the moment, oh, let's break into somebody's house thing. If you were planning it and you were being quite meticulous about it and...
But surely you would break it... Well, if it was just robbery, why not just break in when there's nobody home? So that I don't think...
I think, by the sounds of it, I think he probably started off as a robber. And then maybe
progressed,
thinking, oh, well, there's other things I can do now. And then, you know, it must have sort of thrilled him in a way or something that he thought, oh...
I was going to say, because, like, if he knew that those children were in the house, then obviously he wasn't just there to rob the house.
Exactly, yeah. So I think he sort of progressed.
Right.
So Nicola, she was actually able to help narrow down their search for the house that she was taken with sounds and noises that she'd heard. She said she heard the sound of aircrafts. So they were able to actually identify which runway used a flight path that was over the surrounding suburbs of the time that she was abducted. It was still a lot of houses though, because I seen like there was like a sort of map. I mean, there was like still a lot of houses. So I mean, I say narrowed down. I mean, it's still...
It'll still be helpful though, to get
it was
an area,
helpful,
specific area.
But you know, and then there was still a lot of houses, as I said, and that's all the police knew. Or released to the media about Nicola's abduction, so that I don't actually really know any more details about it, because that's all the police actually released about it. So that it was 9 months later that Carmen Chan was taken. So it was 9 months after Nicola's abduction that Carmen Chan was taken. So in both these cases, their parents were not at home, and both were taken during school holidays, and they actually both attended the same private school as well. But obviously, I think that was just coincidence.
Right.
And as with the previous abductions, I think everyone thought that Carmen would be found safe and eventually released by her abductor, because that seems to be the pattern.
I was just going to say that because the others had been released, then, you know, even though they would have thought, oh, she must be going through hell, at least she's going to be hopefully she's going to be coming back.
And I think that's where the police clearly thought this, you know, case would go, but sadly,
no,
that wasn't the case in this instance. So the days, you know, they started to go by, and there was just, you know, there was nothing. There was no ransom note. There was just silence. You know, the police, you know, obviously kept hope that she would be found alive, but they also had to be realistic with the Chan family that, you know, the more time that went by, the more serious it got.
Yeah.
So nearly a year later, on the 11th of April 1992, a man was out walking his dog in Thomastown when he stumbled across a skull.
Oh.
It had several bullet wounds in the side, and after further investigations, police recovered the rest of the body. The police were confident that they had found the remains of Carmen Chan. They obviously still had to formally identify her, but their first thoughts were
that this
was Carmen Chan. But forensics were quick to confirm it obviously was Carmen. So sadly, she wasn't released and she was found dead.
Do we find out or not that why she wasn't released when the other ones were?
We have theories.
Oh, right.
I don't think we found out concrete reasons why, but there are theories of why.
Okay.
So again, I actually saw this on documentaries because I guess it must have been like news reporters would have been at sort of the crime scene and stuff. So actually, at the crime scene where her daughter was found, Carmen's mum actually held a traditional Buddhist ceremony with Carmen's two sisters on the wasteland where Carmen's body was found. So offering food and flowers and praying for her for her soul. So you actually saw her, you know, like there was like a basket of like, you know, like I think it was like fruit and stuff, and she was obviously going around with sort of like incense sort of things, and it was actually again totally heartbreaking to watch, like, you know, her doing that. But obviously that must have been something that they did. I don't know if it was a tradition or part of their
maybe in their culture.
That they did that. But yeah, you know, it's totally heartbreaking. So the murder of Carmen Chan was a huge escalation by Mr. Crow, as I've, you know, because obviously he's not really known for murdering anybody. You know, so the police did wonder at this point if it was actually somebody else, because it wasn't really part of his you know, thing.
Oh, from who took the other girls.
Yeah, so they would think, oh, is it actually the same person? You know, because obviously the previous person, they've always released, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course that would give you doubts, wouldn't it?
They did obviously doubt it. And the police also thought that this could have been a message sent, and that this was the result of something between Mr. Chan and the offender, that Carmen was just used to make a point. So they kind of went back to the theory, was Mr. Chan, you know, did he have sort of enemies? You know, was there somebody sort of, you know, targeting his daughter to make a point about anything? And obviously the fact that the family car had been spray painted with messages caused speculation that there had been like a vendetta against the family.
Well, that's what it looked like.
Oh yeah, you know, you could sort of say that could be something. So there had been a task force created by the police after Carmen's abduction called Spectrum, and various sources said that members of the team hadn't pressed the drug theory hard enough, because remember I said there was like a sort of Asian drug related message on the car. So they thought maybe they're, you know, maybe like a dodgy business or something, you know, doing drugs sort of on the thing.
Yeah.
But they believed that they hadn't really pressed that theory hard enough. But it was said that every avenue was exhausted at the time, but the drug theory had never been completely excluded. But there was no evidence to connect Mr. Chan to his daughter's disappearance, so they kind of just thought, nah, that's clearly not what's happened here. It's nothing to do with him. So they obviously turned their attentions back to the prime suspect, Mr. Crow.
Yeah.
And the reason that they kept coming back to Mr. Crow was because, you know, he had a history of laying false trails. He'd asked for a ransom for the Nicola Lioness abduction, but then released her, which obviously you'd think, why would he release her? If he asked for a ransom, you would think he'd want that ransom before.
So he didn't get the ransom?
No, but he was like sort of throwing him off a bit, trying to, you know, doing false things.
Right.
And in one house, he picked up the phone and talked to someone in front of the victims, but apparently that was just pretend, as police said that he had already cut the phone lines. Obviously, the spraying of the Chan's car, they think that was him trying to divert the police away from him. So he was obviously, you know, he spray painted the car on purpose to make it look like it was maybe something else. Like,
yeah.
And obviously they did think that, didn't they?
Because yeah.
So I think he was just trying to sort of put them off the scent of him, basically, just doing like random things that might be different, that would make them think that, oh, maybe it's not the same person.
Yeah.
So they had a huge response from the public. Many calls were made about, you know, like dodgy neighbours and, you know, but every single bit of information had to be followed up and scrutinised, and, you know, they were desperate to find this Mr. Crow and stop him reoffending again. So they think they'd set up, like, you know, like sort of call centres, you know, like, if you see anything suspicious, you know, call in the summer. So I think they were inundated with all that. But I think, you know, just because your neighbour looked dodgy, they're like, right, we'll phone. And
I've got a few looking neighbours.
I'm sure none of them, not all of them were, or most of them clearly were just people thinking things like, oh, well, they're a bit dodgy, maybe they've...
Yeah, just because somebody looks dodgy doesn't necessarily mean that they're a murderer.
But obviously, you know, the police, they had to take everyone seriously because, you know, you just don't know what they might have come across, and we're obviously hoping to find this guy.
Yeah, of course.
So the police, they also physically inspected over 30,000 houses as well.
Wow.
They even sent letters to all the doctors to see if they had any patients that they might have concerns about, because obviously this person, I'm assuming, would have a doctor, so maybe they could be, for all we know, like maybe on some like medication or anything that might be...
That's really weird. It was I think I was listening to a podcast I listen to true crime podcasts when I go to sleep, so I'm not sure if I dreamt it or if I was actually listening to a podcast.
Could be.
But I do actually think that when looking for a suspect, that a doctor actually phoned and said, I think it was Dawn on Scottish Murders. I think it was a case that she was saying, and a doctor actually did call the police and say that it could be one of her patients, but it actually turned out that it wasn't.
Right, okay.
But that just reminded me of it, and that's a good call. Why not get in touch with doctors?
Because I mean, they obviously deal with all sorts of people with all sorts of medical issues, whether it be a mental health thing, a physical health thing. So maybe they could have somebody that was like, they're a bit not right, or they've come to them in confidence and said things.
Maybe a bit worrying, or
So I mean, I suppose it's not a bad avenue to explore, is it? To get doctors' thoughts, opinions, or if they had any concerns about anybody.
Well, of course, like doctors have confidentiality, so it depends what the doctor is willing to give away.
But I think if obviously I'm no doctor, of course, but I'm obviously confidential with medical reasons, of course. But I'm sure if they thought they were a danger to anybody, then they could obviously be able to contact police and stuff. So it made sense to obviously, but I don't think that it didn't turn up anything basically from that anyway. And of course, the police, they were also starting to wonder, how many more victims there might be. Is there more victims out here that they're not aware of? So I say the police, they followed up every lead that they could, but the big question was, if Mr. Crewell was responsible for the abduction and murder of Carmen Chan, then why did he not release her like he had with all the other girls? Why did he feel the need to murder her?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm wondering.
And unfortunately, the answer to that from the police is simply they have no idea.
Ugh.
There's plenty of theories, like I've said to you, but no evidence that that points them in any direction. Like they're just obviously theorising about it themselves. And I think if the police don't know, I mean that is frustrating, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah.
I think I do tell you about the theories. I was just thinking, do I say you about theories now off the top of my head? But I think I maybe say it, so I'll save my theories for a minute. So frustratingly, to this day, Victoria police are still unclear to why Carmen was killed by her abductor. So they still don't actually know why she was killed. One thing they do know for sure, though, is that Mr. Crewell went to incredible lengths to keep his identity a secret. And Mrs. Chan said that Carmen, she was a very feisty girl, and she doesn't think that she would have went quietly.
Right.
So she thinks. So the theory. Let me see. I know I'd written it down. So the theory that they do have is that maybe she managed to whip Mr. Crow's balaclava off.
Ah, right.
And maybe she saw his face.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think once that happened, he probably thought, "Shit, I can't release this girl."
Yeah. Because
she can obviously describe me. She's seen my face now.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm actually wondering. I think that's the theory that they're going by, is that's probably why she was killed. Maybe he had every intention of releasing her.
Yeah.
But because she was, as I said, quite a feisty girl, potentially she's managed to unmask him, and he's thought, shit, that, I don't want to get caught, obviously.
It does make sense.
Which, I guess it does make sense. So, the person that was doing the documentary spoke to an unnamed victim from obviously years ago, and she told him that obviously Mr. Crewell had actually spoken, what Mr. Crewell had actually said to her, and she said that he had said, quote, "My liberty, my freedom is more important than your life." So again, going back to that theory of the fact if maybe Carmen did see his face, if he said that to somebody else, my freedom's more important than your life. Yeah. So I don't want to get caught here, so actually, you're going to get killed. So
imagine saying that, though. My freedom's worth more than your life.
I know, that's awful, isn't it?
It is.
But clearly that's what this person, this guy thought. And as we know, in the 80s, DNA testing wasn't as good as either. So that actually impacted later cases. And a lot of evidence and interviews from the 80s were actually lost. So obviously, they obviously thought that there was previous victims that they think they've linked them to. But unfortunately, a lot of evidence, they couldn't tap into that really, because as we know, back in those days, things weren't as thorough as they now, and they don't keep things as well as they probably do now. So, that didn't really help them. So what is thought was his first victim was tied up with a rope. That rope was retrieved at the time and put in evidence, in an evidence bag. But obviously, as I was saying before, he went to great lengths to keep his identity a secret. They think that obviously it probably didn't start off that way. He maybe sort of mastered that as time went on. So they think that the rope that was retrieved from what they think is his first murder, that could have had his DNA on it. And the Spectrum Task Force, they were mortified because they couldn't find this rope.
Ugh.
So it had actually been bagged and taken into evidence. And I said, so they think that because it was what they think was his first victim, he maybe wasn't as clever at hiding his tracks at this point, so they think that maybe that could have had some crucial...
And they just lost it.
Yeah, and they couldn't find it. It was lost somewhere.
That is really infuriating.
I know. And I guess that must be the case in a lot of, like, sort of cases from years ago that are maybe linked to sort of maybe newer cases that maybe they don't have all the evidence that
I know. Should take more care with the stuff.
I know, but things have changed, haven't they?
I know. You can't.
Exactly.
There's no point in going over
it. Exactly. Time has gone by now, so unfortunately that's,
But that is really infuriating.
I know, especially if that could have maybe helped find the person at the time. So the the victim was from 1985, believed her attacker ejaculated in her and swabs were taken, but again, no one knows where they are. So she obviously thought that ejaculated inside her, so she was examined at the time and they were taking swabs, which were obviously put in evidence, I guess, but they couldn't find them either. So again, that's more evidence that could have helped.
Well, yeah, I mean, because that would have been, if that was the case, then that would have been his DNA.
Well, exactly. So the American FBI actually became involved. They came to help and they tried to create a profile of Mr. Crowe, because again, at this point, they still have no idea who this guy is. So they obviously tried to create a profile of him, and they said they actually said that he was quite average, just an average person, nothing special about him probably. But he could be anywhere in the age between 20 and 50, which I thought was quite a big, wide range, because I mean, you could look at in your 20s and 50s, I mean...
I suppose, but how could they... Because they have no idea who the guy is. It's just a profile.
Because all their victims have only ever seen him with the the balaclava.
Yeah.
And they reckon that he could be in sort of between 165 to 183 centimetres tall. His build was described as probably being thin to medium with a small pot belly. He had no accent and was quietly spoken. But that could have been any one of the thousands of people. I mean, to me, that doesn't really give a clue to who this person could be.
No, that's not helpful.
No. So after a 3-year investigation, the Spectrum Task Force had 7 suspects who they thought had the capability to commit these crimes and had committed similar crimes in the past, but none quite as extreme.
Right.
They did identify a prime suspect, and his name was Brian Inkler. He was actually in prison for 10 years in the 1970s after admitting to tying up and attacking 6 girls at knife point over a 2-year period. His house was raided after Carmen Chan, and they found a balaclava and a knife in his attic. But there was no forensic evidence to tie him to it though.
Right.
And there was no witnesses either, so he denies it. So actually on the documentary, I think there was reporters at the time actually was outside his house, and he came out the house and they were like, questioning him about it. And obviously totally denied any involvement, but there was one thing that struck me that obviously they mentioned about the previous victims' lives, about how he'd impacted on their lives and how he'd and he was like, did I impact their lives? And it's like, well,
what, his victims? He doesn't think that he's impacted their lives.
Yeah, and I was like, well, obviously you did. Because, I mean, you got convicted of it, and I'm sure that they would have been...
You've traumatised them.
Yeah, basically traumatised them. But he was just like, did I? So I was like, he says a bit thing. But as I said, he denies any involvement, and unfortunately they don't have any forensic evidence to tie him to it. So, it's now been over 30 years since Mr. Crowe abducted and killed Carmen Chan, and no one has ever been charged. But the investigation actually still remains open to this day.
Right, yeah.
But what's baffled the police is that Mr. Crowe's reign of terror came to an abrupt end after Carmen. Why? Why did it come to an abrupt end? Could he be? Then they think, could he be dead? Could he have died now?
Could he be somebody who's been convicted of something else? He could have been put in jail.
True. Or they think, did he do something that he didn't want to do by killing his victim, and that shocked him into stopping? Because
I was just thinking that,
because he wasn't known for killing this Mr. Crowe, and he did kill did kill Carmen, they think. Well, obviously they were colour, but they think it was him that was responsible. Sorry, did that shock him into maybe not doing it anymore?
I just kind of wondered that, but I just think, well, if you're willing to sort of rape children, I know murder's obviously different to rape, but if you're I don't know. I just think if you're capable of raping, you're capable of doing anything.
Well, exactly. And obviously, I just, after reading the documentary, I just Googled just to see if there was anything more recent. And there has actually been a recent breakthrough with a link to the attacker and him being in the electricity industry, just because of where he dumped his cutting the phone lines.
I was just going,
but also where he dumped his he released his victims, because one of them was released at a substation, and the people in the community say you would have to know something about that area, know something about it if you were. It was just ties to sort of electrical things. So they think maybe the person responsible might have worked in the electricity industry just to know of these places and stuff. But unfortunately, we don't know who Mr. Cruel is. We don't know if he's still alive. We don't really know why he killed Carmen in the end. We think, I think the theory that they have is probably
a good theory.
Yeah.
Whether it might not be true, though.
No, it might not be true.
There might have been a reason. There might have been another reason for him doing it, but we're probably... Well, you never know. We still might find out.
I said, that's, we're 30 years and there's the breakthrough about this, linked to the electricity sort of, industry. So, there could be further breakthroughs, but as I said, could he be dead already? Maybe he has died. You just don't know. You just don't know. And unfortunately, it's a frustrating case because...
It would be really nice for the family to get some closure, though.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Because, things are happening these days. Cases are getting solved that have happened a long time ago now.
Exactly. The fact is,
so you never know.
The case is still, open. So, I'm sure if anybody knows anything out there, then, that there's ways to contact the police and let them know. And maybe, hopefully, one day, we will find out what happened to Carmen and who Mr. Cruel actually is and was. Because that's all we know,
Yeah, well, hopefully one day it'll be solved. But thank you to everybody for listening. And if you would like to follow us on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, we are crime_divers_pod. Email is crime_divers_pod@outlook.com.
And TikTok and YouTube, we're just Crime Divers Podcast.
No, they're different.
Oh, okay, sorry. Muck that one up.
No, YouTube is Crime Divers is one word, but then there's a space in podcast. So Crime Divers Podcast. And on TikTok, it's Crime Divers Podcast, all one word together. There's no spaces.
Right, okay. I forgot about the space.
But I'm sure you'll be able to find us just by searching.
Yes, totally.
If you'd like to make a one-off donation, you could go to buymeacoffee.com. But we drink tea. But buy me a tea would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just make a small donation. On Patreon, patreon.com/CrimeDivers for bonus episodes, early access, ad-free. And if you
just want to support our show, and obviously if you don't already, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.